Again, this is Alan Hoffman. I'm with Deque, and I am lucky enough to have been able to beg, borrow, and steal some former colleagues of mine from the federal government sector to participate today. Just a little bit about me. I spent almost 30 years working in the federal government as a programmer, and then for about 20 years full-time as accessibility, accessibility everything, from working at the Internal Revenue Service, and then 13 or 14 years at the Department of Homeland Security. And I am blind. I'm a screen reader user, Braille user. And so I'm going to say lucky enough, if that's the wrong word, to also bring the person with a disability specifically perspective to that role. And I'm now out of the federal space and have gotten a different perspective from the commercial world. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over and introduce the first person here is Maria Roat, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Great. Thank you, Alan. I'm Maria Roat. I'm the Deputy Federal CIO. I've been in this role for, gosh, not a year yet, may be a year. And I did work with Alan at DHS for a number of years, supporting a lot of the work that they were doing on accessibility across the entire department at DHS. And I've been in the federal government for a long time, and I've been at many, many civilian agencies as well as DOD. Over.
Okay, let's pick up Mark Urban and let you introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Mark Urban. I'm the CDC Accessibility Program Manager. I've been working in the federal government space on accessibility for about 15 years. And before that, I did technical standards with several standards organizations here at the state of North Carolina. I've known Al from way back when in IRS, and I've also done consulting work before I became a federal employee and work at the CDC on response activities. And of course, I run the accessibility program here.
And last but definitely not least, Brooke Aiken.
Thanks, Al. Hi, everyone. My name is Brooke Aiken. I am the Section 508 Program Manager at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, better known as FDIC. My job is 100% accessibility. I enjoy it very much. I have been in this community for about 17 years. I've been at FDIC for a year and a half, but I was lucky enough to work at other agencies and departments before that. Al and I met at DHS. We have known each other for probably 15 years. So it is great to be back talking to everyone.
Okay, thanks everybody. So we have a set of kind of topics or questions that we thought would be good to discuss today. And we'll just sort of go around and let each person answer them. And the first one is, how do we find ways to make accessibility a priority within our organizations? And I want to throw it over to you first, Maria.
Oh, thanks, Alan. Within the agencies, I think Brooke and Mark and others, you guys have incredible roles as the 508 program managers for each of your agencies. But from a federal government perspective, there's a number of steps, for the federal government has taken. And the 21st Century IDEA Act, that's the Integrated Digital Experience Act. And that really aimed to improve the digital experience for government customers. And it really reinforced existing requirements for federal public websites. So even though there's been accessibility standards for one, this is one of the things that's called out in the IDEA Act. The IDEA Act, again, reinforces the need for that and those existing requirements. and making sure that individuals with disabilities, it's included and applying Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, that making sure that that happens. There's, some other initiatives underway across the federal government, and I'll share one example where there's some work being done. Excuse me. This is a project related to HR activities, right? So this is ensuring HR related AI isn't unintentionally biased against job seekers with disabilities, regardless of the disabilities. And really what they're doing with this pilot is, one, building a common language around equitable and inclusive AI and making sure that that's incorporated. And secondly, providing practical resources for AI technical implementers. So, things that can be reused across the federal government or even for industry. And when you look at, that unintentional bias, this could be, if there's something looking for eye contact or how people use their movements, use their hands when they're talking, and making sure that AI isn't used and people aren't biased in that regard because there is something that's different in there. So that's a couple of things, broadly from the federal government perspective that I just wanted to point out.
Okay, thanks, Maria. And let me throw it over to Brooke again, how do you find ways to get accessibility to be a priority within your organization?
Thanks, Al. And thanks, Maria. I really think it's interesting coming from the federal perspective. And I have two avenues that I'm going to come at this question for with ensuring accessibility within my agency as well as within the federal government. And I just want to really establish here that this job for accessibility is about relationships. It really is about building strong relationships so that people understand how passionate you are about accessibility, but then how important it is to ensure that accessibility is within your agency and that expectations are really hopefully met, from the beginning. So really getting to know your agency is super important in relation to ensuring accessibility. So when I worked at Customs and Border Protection, the agency is 60,000 employees and the mission is protecting our borders. So how am I going to ensure accessibility with a mission of law enforcement? And what it really came down to was getting that relationship with upper management and with employees. Do they have a disability? Do they have a family member with a disability? Do they understand how important accessibility is within this agency? We had Border Patrol agents that would get injured on the job and they still needed to work. And so it was super important that we provided accessible documents, accessible websites, accessible applications so they could continue to do their job. And accessibility within my current agency of FDIC is so important within the agency. And I'm lucky that they created a position for accessibility and for a 508 program manager so that right from the get-go, it was extremely important. But it's important for me to find those relationships with our employees that need the accessibility, but with also members of the public that we're serving to ensure that our Money Smart games, that our bankers conventions are all accessible and just trying to bring that into the mix. And for the federal government as a whole, ensuring accessibility is also part of our job, making sure that we're working with GSA, that we are communicating with OMB, that they are reacting to surveys that we provide them. We provide them self-assessments twice a year. We want to make sure that they're hopefully reviewing those and reading those and listening to us and really continuously bringing accessibility to the forefront being involved in the accessibility community of practice so that it's continuously a priority. Thanks, Al.
Okay, thanks, Brooke. And now we'll toss it over to Mark Urban.
Well, as some of you may be aware, CDC's been a little busy the past year. Something about a global pandemic or something or other. Yeah, we've been, you know, up to the chin, as it were, with all of the activity, and it's been an important time. Brooke talked about building those relationships, and that's absolutely necessary, because if you don't build those relationships ahead of time, when you really need them, you're going to be in trouble. And when you have a significant thing going on, like a pandemic, you have to be able to talk to people and have them know you're a trusted voice, and that you're not there to judge them. You're not there to, you know, scourge them for not doing perfect accessibility, but to push them and to ratchet them. And I want to pick on Brooke again, because she pointed out something very important, which is mission alignment. Talk to your people and your frontline staff and the managers and even the senior leadership from a standpoint of what is your agency's mission. So here at CDC, the verbiage is public health impact. So when I was I literally would go in, because CDC is a data agency, we deal with the science. I'd go in and I'd dig out data from the resources about COVID impacts, disparate impacts on persons with disabilities, and say, we need to reach these people. This is how we need to reach these people. This is part of our mission, and an important part of our mission. Those conversations were much easier because you're now talking to someone from a framework of helping them achieve their mission in a better way, instead of, I'm going to make you jump through all these hoops. The hoops are important, though, and so that's the one thing I want to add on, is building processes that integrate accessibility into all the other things you're doing. And I'll harp on this again, became very important for us in the response. So in the response, we had a very short, simple mechanism to produce accessible materials that were not fully accessible, and we knew it, but were more accessible than the materials that we had 5 minutes ago. And with a small amount of effort, we were able to move the bar toward accessibility, and then document and backlog through a process the things that we needed to go back and fix. Is that the ideal? Is that the way we imagine accessibility, this glorious life cycle where everything is evaluated for accessibility before we even think about what tool to use? That isn't how it happens. But by doing it, we were able to then share that, and I'll throw a plug to the assistance of Deque for offering their webinar platform for us to train state and localities on how to quickly produce moderately accessible materials. Fully accessible? No, but better than what was being put out there, and improving public health across the country. So sometimes it's about, you know, it's building those relationships and then being there and being a trusted partner and recognizing that there's a mission that needs to be done, as well as how to do the mission better by being accessible. Al?
I think if I could
Okay.
add on.
Oh, sorry, Maria.
Yeah, I was thinking if I could add on to Mark to take it one step further. I think, you know, as a CIO, you know, you talk about establishing, you know, accessibility as a priority, you know, to your question, Alan, and building on Mark and even Brooke, is that understanding your customer, right? Who are your customers that are coming to the table? As a CIO, I had to take into account 40 million small businesses that were the small businesses' customers, and that the sheer volume of stuff that we put out, you know, and SBA very paper heavy, you know, right? Like many places, but, you know, PDFs and, you know, just PDFing a document wasn't enough. And part of that understanding the customer tied in with the people who were producers too, is making sure that they understood their customer base, that it just wasn't, you know, oh, we're just going to do something, but understanding that that customer base is a priority, and that customer base comes in many forms. So even when you're thinking about that customer experience, you take it into gamut the entire audience. So I just wanted to add on to that, you know, as a CIO who thinks about customers, who thinks in journey mapping and thinks about customer experience, a lot of the CIOs, they get that and they understand it. But it's also making it a priority, that it's not a CIO priority, it's an organizational priority, to, you know, Mark's comments.
And I'll just throw just a couple anecdotes on top of that. Thanks, Maria. I think all three of the people on here will remember these. Well, at least the second ones. When I was at IRS, we started having a big push about getting tax documents accessible. And somebody asked me, well, do we need to do them all? And I said, well, do they get a choice which tax laws they have to comply with? And no. So they kind of got it. Sometimes it's just, like you said, the customer's perspective. Who's the customer and what do they need? And when I was at DHS, right away, we had Katrina. And I worked with people to get one of the application people use to apply for assistance fixed. Let's just say it that way. And it was during the emergency. This is kind of a common thread here. During the emergency, your customers need stuff, and if your stuff's not ready, then they've got to go through even more hoops than they might have otherwise had to go through. And we got through it. But at the time we had, at Homeland Security, we had a lady who was the first Black person from Jamaica who is deaf and is a lawyer on staff. And she was down in Louisiana helping out to make sure people with disabilities sort of got the best services that could be given. And she came back with just a ton of stories about the data on how many people with disabilities were there. It was like 25% of the people who received services during Katrina had disabilities. And people were just stunned. They were like, really?
Wow.
And then, again, even down in Puerto Rico, one of the people that I worked with at DHS volunteered to go down, and she had a disability. She went down there to help in Puerto Rico, and she came back saying how many people that they worked with had disabilities down there. And then Deque last fall did a lot of work with helping with voter forms. PDF forms were being given out and were accessible and this and that. And Deque jumped in and helped out to get a lot of those forms made accessible so people could, take care of their business, their duties. And now, of course, poor Mark, he's in the hot seat over at CDC right now. So it's a common theme, and it's a good way to get the people in agencies to realize what their customers need and why they need to do accessibility. So with that said, let's move on to the 3-part question, which is we want to talk about successes, challenges, and opportunities that you've had in your organization that you'd like to share. And again, I'm going to pick on Maria first. That's okay.
Sure. Talking about successes, when I came into the Small Business Administration in 2016 as the CIO, a success, I hired the first Section 508 program manager there. Sean, and he was terrific, and he just jumped in with both feet. And I would say that was a success, being able to, bring somebody on board. They've never had anybody before. It was definitely different. HR was, why are you doing this? And, I recognized the importance of having somebody and bringing somebody in. And that was really, really critical. And I think another success we had was when we updated our website. We scrubbed it, we were moving it to the cloud, we were doing all these things, but not only, we were trying our best to make sure it was accessible and that anything posted, any material was accessible. You make websites mobile ready, but what about accessibility and making sure that was built in, and making sure that happens. But I think challenges, there's still a lot of challenges out there. Making sure that like I mentioned, the website and communications technology and software. And I think it's come a long way. A lot of the software that we use every day, whether it's, Word or Excel or PowerPoint, and the capabilities are there, but teaching people how to use those inherent capabilities will get you 90% plus of the way there if you're using the tables, if you're using built-in section headers, or if you're using the built-ins that come with it. And I think the challenge is continuing to educate people who've been doing the same thing for many, many years, and then all of a sudden they have to learn how to build tables and how to use reference links and things like that within documents. And then that way, when you convert it to a PDF, a lot of that stuff flows over. And I think there's still a challenge with teaching people how to do it. I got a lot of pushback, you know, when we had a several 100-page document. And I'm talking about practical experience here, that they were like, well, why do we have to do it? I said, well, if you had built it the right way to start with, you wouldn't have this problem. And so, yeah, I think, you know, those challenges are going to persist. I think there's a lot of opportunities on the third part for just increasing that digital equality, right? So from a development perspective, using pre-established design libraries, right? Base it off, GSA's got the USA Web Design System, using those pre-existing design libraries. And on development teams, right? You got UX designers, they generate the entire front-end design from, you know, mock-ups to the final product, you know, and things to be incorporated by the developers. So by using the design library, it just simplifies the whole process just substantially. And the designer is already working with elements that have already been tested. They're already 508 compliance, and they've already been through that. And I think it's important that if you have a UX designer on the team, that knowing about the design library and really using that and incorporating into all of it. And you know, that includes all your elements, right? The colors, the fonts, the sizes, they've already been tested. And it makes it very simple for developers to incorporate those elements into any of the technology. And even a thoroughly tested design library probably covers 80% of the WCAG and those requirements. There might be work for production to do on the front end, but you know, a lot of that is already built in. And I think the second part to that is really opportunities, and this is happening across the federal government, but continuing to integrate 508 testing with that test-driven development, you know, those CI/CDs practices, testing the final version, you know, to get you as close to 100% compliance as possible. There's a lot of tools available. Many of them are free, as you guys well know, but making sure that your development team has a solid testing strategy. And it isn't difficult to add one more tool into your test suite. And that good testing strategy should incorporate and should focus on the coverage of those pieces and automated it to the extent possible, so that, you know, any of the extra tools around, you know, taking the design library, getting the final testing, automating all of that through the process, through that entire CI/CD pipeline. Every build that's merged into the master branch, if you will, is tested for 508 before being deployed to production. So I think those are just a couple of things, you know, where there's opportunities for the federal government to keep and continue building in, not just the tools we use every day off the shelf, but things that we're building in or configuring to make sure that things are development ready. Over. Uh-oh, I think we lost Alan.
Oh,
There he
Alan
is.
has returned.
Coming back.
Alan has returned. He missed it all, Alan.
Hey, Alan.
I am back.
Welcome
I
back.
gave my whole spiel on design pipelines, Alan, and
Yeah,
design libraries. And
It was impressive. You'll have to watch the replay.
Now you gotta watch. You gotta take in the replay.
Okay. Well, don't wait on me. Are you?
I didn't. I was just finishing. So thank you,
oh.
Alan.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, I'm sure that was wonderful material. So
It was awesome.
It was
Yeah.
great.
So let's go to Mark next with the same successes, challenges, opportunities that you would like to share.
Well, the first success I'd like to share is actually related to what Maria was just talking about. one of the challenges in accessibility is getting accessibility integrated into the development life cycle rather than some kind of a testing life cycle. One of the problems we have in modern development processes, whether it's DevOps, you mentioned a little bit along those lines, Maria, but also in agile development, in sprint-based iterative development, is there's a tendency to focus on accessibility as a user acceptance testing activity. Like, okay, now we're going to accept the system after they've gone through 10 development life cycles. All the money's been spent, all of the activity is done, they're about to launch the thing, and then we check it for accessibility through testing. And surprise, surprise, if it wasn't designed to be accessible, it's not going to be accessible. So one of the things that we're very happy about is a process that we're working on right now to move accessibility evaluation to the individual developer level. So it's two parts. One is so when a project comes to us now, we put them on this track. We call it fast access. And if it's a low or moderate risk application versus some of our high risk applications, the development team will be trained on accessibility relating to what they're actually doing. And then they will be given tools to actually test their development in situ rather than waiting for the whole branches to be compiled into a final product. What that allows for is modular development, which is what Maria was talking about, being able to create pieces that are accessible, not buildings that are accessible as well. Then you check the building to see if it's been put together in an accessible way. But if the pieces aren't accessible, if the floors are modular and every floor doesn't have an accessible restroom, it really doesn't matter whether at the end you check whether restrooms are accessible. They're not going to be accessible. It's building each piece with accessibility in mind and checking that in real time. So we have the developers learn about accessibility as part of the requirements of the project. And then they check the accessibility utilizing the tool sets that are in browser. So literally they can check their code by rendering the page as it's currently being worked on and walk through testing, including both automated and manual checks, since we all know automated checks can't check a lot of stuff on their own.
Hey, watch it. You're on a DQ sign.
I know. Hey, automated checks do a fantastic job. And as Maria pointed out, if you miss some of those, you're missing some basic building blocks. But manual checks are important too, and those together allow a developer who's been trained in using those tools effectively to be able to certify that their own stuff is accessible. And what that self-certification process does is it allows us to create a compendium of all the current 508 issues or accessibility issues that are in an application and work those as bugs or work those in sprints as part of the iterative development process. So by the time you get to user acceptance testing, we're just checking to make sure you didn't completely blow everything because you've already done the accessibility. You already know those pieces fit together. You're just checking to make sure the building was put together right. That moving away from testing as a final acceptance process and as an integrated element of the development lifecycle and of each developer's responsibility has been a huge game changer for us, trying to move away from the model of, I'm sorry, this is totally inaccessible and we can't let this go live tomorrow, especially in an environment like we're in currently where things need to get done. Are there errors in this process? We're still figuring it out. There's a lot of challenges to this model, but it creates a development workforce that actually knows accessibility, because yesterday's developer on one contract ends up being today's developer on another contract somewhere else in the agency or at another HHS agency, and all of HHS has responsibilities around accessibility, just like everywhere in the government. So we got out of the model of, we don't train any developers. No, they're the ones writing the code. Help them to write accessible code. And that's adding huge value for us long-term over our relationships. So I guess I'll talk about opportunities. AI and other emerging technologies are creating real opportunities for people with disabilities in a way that literally hasn't happened in my lifetime. We are creating situations where we are building real-time, captioning systems into meeting technologies. We're evaluating AI tools to help us gather requirements and build in real time applications that conform to someone else's needs. There's some real opportunities. There's a whole project being worked out in the University of Maryland over basically creating AI rules around adapting output for accessibility for people's particular needs and identifying the needs. So literally you would have your own, thing that you would put in your browser, and it would tell the browser what your needs were, and it would adapt the page for it based on the output. Very interesting and very great opportunities. And there's a lot of interest in that throughout the technical community. And then I think the other opportunity I see is there are processes already in place for things like security and privacy and records management. Those, to the extent possible, aligning to those requirements, whether it's getting an ATO or getting the FedRAMP certification if you're looking at the, at the federal-wide level, or the government-wide contracting systems, putting in accessibility into the other controls and structures that are in those, give you a lot of bang for the buck, and those are some real opportunities in the future. And then finally, the biggest challenge we have is, biggest challenge for us that we're seeing is the fact that more and more technology is moving to a low-code, no-code environment where there isn't a developer, there isn't a knowledgeable person who's evaluating accessibility. Instead, you get a platform, and with little effort, you can create an application that that you don't really have a lot of control over, and you may or may not be able to make accessible. You might be able to change the colors, but you can't change the, the down deep ARIA labeling or the form control names, the IDs, and all the other elements that are part of really making something the difference between kind of sort of a little accessible and really accessible. And that's becoming an emerging challenge, because these low code, no code environments, if they don't have accessibility built into them, you can't fix it. They literally can't fix it, or they lose the ability to, fix it, which you lose the benefit of having these low code, no code. So my desire would someday to see, just like Maria was talking about Office and the way Office provides all of these prompts and support for accessibility if you understand how to use it. That's our next challenge, is speaking to the vendors of these products and services and giving them opportunities to improve the accessibility of their, basically what is now a drag and drop or build and run kind of infrastructure. Brooke? Sorry I went so long.
Thanks, Mark. So, so the question is, as a follow-on, talk about successes, challenges, and opportunities you see in delivering equal access in the federal government. So I'm going to take this from a 508 and a 504 accommodations perspective. Successes that I currently see with just coming from the pandemic within the FDIC corporation. When the pandemic started, we have a large deaf and hard of hearing community, and they would go into the office every day and rely on their video phone, which is communication essential for someone who may be deaf and hard of hearing. And they were very, very frightened when they did not have that technology and were forced to work from home full time. And I literally felt that and got phone calls about it. And while that is the accommodation portion, I want to make sure that our employees still have equal access. And so what did FDIC do? Quite a few things. First of all, we use Microsoft Teams as our communication with our meetings. we were constantly knocking on their door asking when they were going to enable their automated captions for FDIC as we use it in the cloud. And I really do think that just within FDIC and within other government agencies, that actually got enabled much quicker than probably expected. Huge success there. We also ensured that if our employees that were deaf and hard of hearing were still concerned, the video relay services were available to them. We just wanted the people to feel a sense of ease in that community so that they were able to do their job. And, you know, now we're working on getting transcripts and just making sure that everyone has equal access. Another huge success within the federal government as a whole is the trusted tester methodology. And I have to give a big shout out to DHS for that one. We really are moving as a federal government and using one testing methodology so that we are testing the same way. Maybe one day we'll have a repository of test results that we can all use, because within the trusted tester methodology, if you have that certification, and it is an actual certification that people put on their resumes, we can actually use those test results. So if Mark, you know, wants a product that FDIC has tested and we're using the same testing methodology, we can give them our test results. There's no need to recreate the wheel for that. Huge successes there. I want to talk about challenges, and that within the federal government, funding is always a challenge. You know, Section 508 compliance is always a nice to have. And while there may be positions, getting funding for other avenues, it can be difficult within other government agencies. I'm very lucky at FDIC that we do have the capability that if 508 needs more support, I have the management and I have the support of our CIO that let's have a discussion and let's talk about it. I really, really do hope that other agencies can get there and maybe get a full-time position, maybe get a whole team. I'm lucky enough to have a team. We have a staff interpreter at FDIC. So, you know, we are working on equal access. And opportunities, I just want to hone in on an opportunity that I have seen with equal access within the pandemic at FDIC. So when the pandemic started, there are many, many FDIC employees that only were allowed to go to their office, and their jobs depended on being in the office. And when that pandemic started, I had quite a few supervisors come and say, we need work for our employees. Can you help? Within 2 days, we trained over 200 employees on how to make a document accessible, allowing them to review documents within their work, within their web pages, within their SharePoint sites, giving them really an opportunity within the corporation, to the point now where 2 teams, document accessibility teams, have been created. And also, I had someone last week tell me how much they enjoy it, which is comical to me because document accessibility can be very tedious. So I really was super excited about that opportunity within FDIC, and hope that, you know, as program managers and accessibility experts within the federal government, more opportunities will come like that one that we had specifically at FDIC. Thanks, Al.
Well, that's a lot of successes. So I just want to throw a few thoughts on the top of that, and Brooke stole a lot of them, but that's okay.
I'm sorry. And we do have
That's
10
perfect.
minutes, Al.
We got 10 minutes, but I got a few thoughts here. And since I'm not a Fed, I can just throw out anything now. But Brooke touched on a couple of the real biggies, which is something that I've shared. I've shared this with anybody, so nothing really new, but it'd be nice if it would go away, which is, Brooke touched on it, but I'm just gonna reinforce it. If you were to ask the 508 program managers in the government, what is their biggest concern? And the answer always is, without any hesitation, funding and authority.
Yeah.
And they all realize that, they're not, 508 and accessibility is not going to be in charge of everything within the IT area, but they need to have some minimal resources so that they can help those programs and program managers to get started and do what they need to do. If you have an agency, even if an agency of 10,000 and you think one person's going to do it all, it really doesn't make much. You don't have one security person for an agency of 10,000 if you'd like to be secure. So you're not going to have one person to do an agency for accessibility. And they're similar scope. They're just not as publicly brought up a lot. When there's a cybersecurity incident, the whole world gets to hear about it pretty quick. But if there's an accessibility incident, yeah, well, maybe not quite so much. So that's the first one. On the success side, I'm going to put a plug in for if you want to know about how the government's working on accessibility, you can go to section 508.gov, and there's oodles of stuff there at no cost. It's your taxpayer money. A lot of resources are there from the Federal Chief Information Officers Council Accessibility Community of Practice, which is a success that I would say, where a lot of folks in different agencies who had been accomplishing quite a bit came together and said, we need to get this stuff out in a shareable way, so we're not recreating the wheel. There was a lot of siloed activity going on, I would say, in the first 2000 to 2010. And that was the point where we said, we got to get together and share this stuff, because there's no need to keep rewriting this. Every agency write their own. And a lot of that stuff is for 508 program managers. There's not like a book to go out and buy to say certified section 508 program manager. There isn't one. And there's a whole bunch of stuff to learn. And in many cases, federal 508 program managers get the job by surprise, you're it. And they have to start somewhere. But now they have a lot of resources to learn. They have a much more, I'm going to say, knowledgeable community to tap to help them come up to speed and get a handle on what is best to do within their agency. And that's huge, because having 508 program managers who don't understand the work they need to be doing, you're not going to get very far. And then the opportunities, I'll throw out another resource. It was released today, so this is a new one. And I don't even know if Brooke and Mark know this one, which is DHS just released I'm going to say way more in-depth accessibility playbook for 508 programs. I'm going to say it covers pretty much everything in nauseating detail. If it's not in there, you might be surprised. It gives people methods, it gives them information to be able to integrate accessibility into all of their processes, procurement, development, etc. The nuts and the bolts to do it. And where to get that would be send an email to accessibility@hq.dhs.gov. I expect it will be moved over to section 508.gov shortly. And I hear somebody with a question. Is that you, Maria?
Yeah, that was me. I was just going to ask you when it was going to get posted publicly.
Well, I'm not sure if they posted it out, if there's a link. That's why I would say send an email to accessibility@dhs.gov. They sent me an email.
I was going to say, I got an email about it too, but I don't think it was a public URL.
I had done I contributed to some of it, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. And so people want to see it. It's good stuff.
I was going to say, let me know when it gets posted.
Okay. And I'm going to throw out one more, the AI side that everybody wants to talk about AI. I would say that's where DQ really is coming right out there. The Axe, I'm going to say, I think it's Axe Dev Pro. I got to get it right. Slap me around, Josh, if I've got it wrong.
Axe Dev Tools.
Incorporate Dev. Yeah, but I think there's a Pro at the end now.
Oh yeah, yeah. So the browser extension that has the that's the Pro features.
Yeah, so I don't want to get into too many like in the weeds on this, but the idea is, first of all, it's a way to interactively for a developer test their page, point out what they're doing, ask them questions, as well as use the automated, all in a streamlined workflow, and tell them what's wrong as they go along. So what you get from that, and it's using AI. So for example, one of them is an automated way to test a page for keyboard access. I think the number is like 80% or 85% now. So first of all, in accessibility, there's some errors that almost never come up. So they're still important, but you almost never see them. So in practical terms, if you can cover an 80 or 85% of the things that actually come up pretty regularly, the amount of time savings to get those things figured out is reduced drastically. And then there may be, a small amount of manual things you just have to do. So for example, if you have a video on your page, somebody's going to have to go through and check the captions and the audio description. It's not getting around that yet. I always use the word yet, but a lot of the other things are taken care of quickly with minimal manual intervention. And what that does through the interactivity is, if you tell somebody, it's like spell check. You tell them it's wrong enough times in a row, after a while, they kind of quit getting it wrong. And so it's training by sort of doing, as opposed to, and I keep being called father of trusted tester, but trusted tester is a lot of work to pass. It gives you a lot of knowledge, and it validates that you can test effectively. But it takes a lot of work. And what the DQ tool does is it brings the training, the doing, and the consistency of the results together all in one piece, where people don't have to put in a huge upfront chunk of time. And I think that's kind of where it has to go to be able to work in agile environments. People can't take off a month very easily to go get certified. They should, but that's pretty hard.
And Al, I would add on, people can't take a month in the current development environments to do testing.
Right.
For every sprint.
Yeah, they're not going to do a month testing sprint. So those are the big things in my mind. I think the challenges, again, go back to senior executive leadership buy-in, not pointing at Maria, and funding. It's pretty basic. If the leadership doesn't recognize that it needs to get done and be behind getting it done, then it's not going to get done. And so, but that's challenge number one. And challenge number two is then put the money where your motivation is. And then I think we'll see a huge, faster change. How are we doing on time, Josh?
We are right at time.
Ta-da! And now it's time for the $10,000 questions.
That's right. That's right. So we only have a few minutes here. I do want to make everyone aware we're just going to go over time a little bit here, but let's have one question from the Q&A. I think Gabby asked a great question, which is, my job entails designing constituent-facing websites for state and federal elected officials to provide resources and information. To your understanding, should sites like these be AAA compliant or AA acceptable? Or is AA acceptable? Currently, most are not accessible at all.
I'll throw a stab to start at it and simply say yes, because I used to be a mayor, so I was a local official, and
Mark
I didn't
the
have a website.
mayor.
Yeah, it was
No
back
way,
when
man.
dinosaurs ruled the earth.
What?
And so, but I will tell you that oftentimes local governments, especially more rural environments where I was, are pretty strapped for resources. So the first answer is build a core of information that you want and make your front page and the core of information that you're trying to provide accessible. Don't try to eat the elephant in one bite. Then focus on making your press releases, which are usually information they're really trying to get out as quickly as possible. And I will refer you back to the training that we did for CDC, which is actually available on the Deque YouTube site, for how to quickly make things more accessible that are PDF documents. That level of effort is not unreasonable for a single person who's running a website or a web content resource. And then finally, think about how you can create some templates that people can just put stuff in, and you can quickly move into accessible materials because you've already got a accessible template. Ladies,
don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah, and I can just add, you ask about the WCAG standards, AA, AAA. We go by AA. If you can get to AAA, fantastic. But as Mark said, do it little by little, and if you can definitely get to that AA standard, hey, you are ahead of the game.
Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you so much for attending. We have reached our time limit. I'm sorry if there weren't answers to all the questions here. There's so many great questions. We're going to work offline and try and get some of these questions answered. So stay tuned for more. All right. But thank you to everyone. Yeah, that's right. There's always more homework, right? Good thing we're all at home now. So yeah, again, thank you to all the panelists out there. Really great content. And Alan, thank you very, very much.
And I want to say thanks to Brooke, Mark, and Maria. Appreciate it.
Yeah, super fun.
Thanks,
I want to say
everybody.
thanks to Maria and Brooke for making me look good.
All right. Excellent.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thanks. Enjoy the rest of AxCon.